Indo-American community, especially as regards to education. Okay, so now let's turn this a little bit. For the opponent of the bill, I've read this book some time ago. There was a book by William Brown, president of Princeton University, and Derek Bach, president of Harvard University, called The Shape of the River, Long-Term Consequences of Considering Race in College and University Admissions, published in 1998, soon after Prop 209. The book is quite extensive, covering 45,000 students over 20 years, and examined their progress in school, their graduation rate, and as well as their success rate once they finish school. And they have found that the diversity in the student population is beneficial in every way, including benefits to other students who attend the university at the same time, as well as later on career successes and community activism after graduation. So for the opponent of the bill, how do you address this? Shouldn't there be some kind of criteria to allow this to happen since it benefits everyone? With the Senator, would you like to go? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, taking notes. Okay. Basically, there's a book published that has concluded by very distinguished scholars from presidents of Harvard and Stanford that has concluded that diversity in universities have benefit students, both the students who are admitted under affirmative action as well as those who are in school with them. And in terms of their academic achievement in school and their graduation rate and future career successes. Mr. Lair wants to answer first, that will be fine too.
There's nothing in being in opposition to SCA5 that contradicts the conclusions you just quoted from the Bach book. The UCs are not lily white. They are not lacking in diversity. They are, in fact, the only group that has gone down in a significant way since the passage of Prop 209 is whites, which are down 36% in terms of their percentage of enrollees to the University of California. You have 37% who are poor. You have 4% who are African American, 27.5% who are Latino, 40% who are Asians. If that isn't diversity, I don't know how you define diversity.
You know, I want to mention the book that Albert just mentioned. It was written by the president of Harvard University, Robert Bach, and then Princeton University, William Bowen. The book actually is a study, an over 20-year study, following about 40,000 students, their career, and looking at whether affirmative action, in other words, the use of race, as one of the many criteria for admitting students into the top-ranking universities, about 20 of them, including all the Ivy League universities, whether affirmative action program has in any way affected the life of these people, and whether it has deterred them from being successful in university or becoming less successful once they graduate from the university. And the study really was very interesting in the sense that it found that yes, when they were admitted into the university, their GPA and test score was generally on the average below the other peers. And then when they were in university, their GPA was not as sterling as the other people, but they also graduated. And once they graduated, they've gone on to become very successful in graduate schools and also in their career. And what was most amazing is that they found that these underrepresented minorities who previously were denied opportunities to excel, to prove themselves, once they graduate and enter into the society, they become much more engaging in civic and political affairs and become important political influential leaders in the society. And that is really what diversity is all about, is to make sure that everybody has a chance in America, to whether you're black, white, or Asian, have a chance to get an education and then to prove yourself later on in your career and your service to the country. And I think that is a very good book. And by the way, the two institutions are still today using race as criteria for admission.
Thank you. Senator Huff?
once again, we're blurring the distinction between private institutions, even though they're world-class, Harvard and Princeton, with California publicly supported institutions. All of us in this room are paying taxes to support our universities, our California state universities. California has one of the highest tax rates in the nation. We have the most progressive income tax, meaning the more you make, the more you pay. So you are funding this, and you should have a say in it. Harvard and Princeton are not funded that way, nor do they have this mandate to allow top students into their institutions. So whatever they want to do is fine. I don't know what their percentage of the diversity is. What I do know is, as a policymaker, we need to have policies that reflect the wishes of our taxpayers, and that's you. When you look at economic diversity, few people realize that while the state is paying half of the tuition and then the students are making up the rest, those of you that were paying tuition for your kids to go to the UC system or CSU, did you realize a third of that was again going for university grants for the ones that didn't have the money to pay for it? So they have Pell Grants, which is national grants. They have state grants, Cal Grants. Then they would get university grants made up with your tuition. Whether you were able to scrimp and save and do it or not, as we were, it was tough on us, but we paid that. So you have half of the students at the UC that pay zero tuition because they're getting federal, state, and university grants. So I would say that is a way to achieve the economic diversity that we're talking about. We are giving people a leg up. Everybody has a challenge, the previous speaker said. While everybody has a challenge, it shouldn't be based on the color of your skin.
You know, we should bear in mind one of the reasons why UC's student body has become much more diverse after the passage of 209 is simply this fact. The California high school graduates are more ethnically diverse. I mean, we have few, as a percentage of high school graduates, we have a lower number of whites, and we have more Asians and more Latinos and a steady number of African Americans. Now, what I think is missing in this discussion, which the opponents refuse to really address, is yes, it's more diverse, but we need to expand opportunities for all those who are eligible. It's not good enough for me to just say, oh, you know, it used to be 12.5% guaranteed admission for those in the top 12.5%, now it's 9%. And then with the 9%, it's a zero-sum game. It should not be a zero-sum game. We need to support our UCs and CSU at a much higher level so that all of our students who do the hard work, get the grades, take the A through G courses, have an opportunity at UC and CSU. Mind you, again, this SCA is not about just UC. We're talking about CSU, which is today turning down students because they don't have the kind of budget that they really need. Let's not be just focusing on UC. There are CSU students who for the first time are experiencing denial, even though they may be admitted, even though they may be eligible, because there are not enough courses that are being offered. They have to wait 1 year or 2 years. And I think it's totally irresponsible for our political leaders not to address the lack of opportunity that needs to be there for all of our California high school graduates who are eligible.
Thank you, Henry. I think we heard that message.
I just want to reach across the divide and agree with Henry. And if I could wave a magic wand and provide more money to the UCs and restore tuition to where it was when I was a freshman, which was $80 a quarter. And the second point, just to respond to the professor, when he kind of looked up to the Ivies and say that Harvard and Yale still use race. Well, do you know that the average Asian American admissions to the Ivies for the past 20 years has averaged at 16.5%. Now that hasn't changed since 1993. And the Asian American college-age population since 1993 in this country has doubled. Asians have been the highest SAT scores, the highest national merit. There is no way on God's green earth that you could have kept the admissions at 16.5% unless you are discriminating against Asians in the admissions. It just can't happen. And so I don't think I'll be holding up the Ivies as the paradigm of the kind of admissions process we want here in California.
They prepare questions, although some of them have been asked, but they have been answered. So what we'll do is I will go to the audience questions, and there are many, many of them, and I will group them. The most concern that people seem to have, as this crowd seems to be obviously against SCA5, is what is the political process and how does it work? Where does it go next? And if you should be opposed or support this proposal, where do you go next? Now everybody keep quiet now. I don't want a lot of noises here. We have like 10 people here. Who's going to kick you out if you start making noise? They're big. I think this will be appropriate for Senator Huff to address.
So this passed out of the Senate toward the end of January. So now it is in the Assembly. And there's been some comments that the author could bring it back, and he originally said he would, then he said he wouldn't. He can't bring it back. He has no authority. The Senate, once it goes to the Assembly, it's there. Now, Rules Committee will determine, and I hope I'm right on all this stuff, but generally I'm fairly accurate. Rules will determine which committee path it will go. It did like 3 committees in the Senate, and it will likely have a similar amount in the Assembly, but not necessarily. If they decided they just wanted to wharf it, as they call it, without reference to file and plop it right up on the Assembly floor to vote on it, they can do that. But let's assume that's not going to happen for the sake of argument. So we need to pay attention to what committees it's assigned to. And then when they have those committees, they are publicly noticed in some fashion. And you have an opportunity at the end of that to speak for or against, and typically the author will have some speakers for, and then there will be opponents there that have equal time. And then usually if you have a large number of people, you don't get an opportunity to say much other than I agree with the bill or I don't agree with the bill. But each public committee, you'll have an opportunity to say something. Then it will go to the floor of the Assembly where you don't have an opportunity to say anything. It's all done by then. And then it needs to pass on a supermajority vote. The Democrats control more than 2. They have like 56 votes right now. They need 54, or they have 55. They need 54 to make it pass. So they have 2 surplus. You pull off 2 Democrat votes, you can defeat this. It's as simple as that.
Anyone else like to ask about this? It's a very straightforward fact. Now, just as a background, so that you understand how these things work, is as Senator Huff said, it needs to go through committees. Committees are usually made of a smaller number of people, although usually the majority party controls the committee votes. And it's a majority vote, it's not a 2/3 vote, so generally speaking, if the Speaker of the Assembly agrees with a certain bill that does not face much opposition in committees, unless it's super, super controversial sometimes. So it will come to the Assembly floor. As Senator Huff said, there is no timing. We don't really know. It could be very fast, could take a very long time. And a lot of that depends on the will of the Assembly Speaker, who is essentially the leader, who controls where the Assembly members sit in their offices, whether in the basement or on the 3rd floor overlooking the lawn, and also whether they become committee chairs or they will be minions in little bitty nothing committees. So, therefore, the committee speaker has a tremendous amount of power. In the Assembly, there are also caucuses. Of course, there are parties, but there are caucuses of special interest. And the racial caucuses are the Hispanic, the Asian, and the Black caucuses. And of course, there are many more members in the Hispanic caucus than there are Asian caucus. The Asian caucus has 8 members right now, 4 of whom are Chinese Americans. And one of them is here, not present here, but represents District Minister Paul Fung. So if you want to give feedback, it's probably best to give to people who can make a difference, who will be Assembly members. Whether you're for or against this proposal, give them a call. You know, it's better than email. Email's okay. Fax, probably better, because you can't get through on the line sometimes. Sometimes you just get mad at you and tell you to shut up. But anyway, the protests, you know, as part of the American democracy process, it happens. I would suggest everybody stay calm during protest. Do not, attack anybody. No violence. It's against the law to be breaking people's windows or spray paint on their offices. Remember, these are also people that you have elected. If Paul Fang is elected out of this district, a lot of them are Chinese Americans here. So be sure that you voice your opinion as a voter, and that's what APAPA is for. If you're not registered, be sure you get registered. If you're registered, be sure to vote. I have run many campaigns before. The very first thing you do is go to the voter data and see who has the most power, meaning the most votes. And both in terms of registered voter as well as who voted. We do data screenings, we'll look at frequent voters, usually 4 out of 5 5 elections. And if you voted, we knock on your door, ask for your opinion. If you didn't vote, I'm sorry, you don't count. So no matter what the numbers are here, if you don't vote, you don't register, you don't count in this country. Okay, so please do so in the future. Now, we're sort of on the subject of politics. There are actually quite a few people who ask political questions, and I'm venturing into very dangerous ground here, so careful. What is the politics around this issue? It breaks open right around Chinese New Year's, just before midterm election primary. It may affect many seats. Asian Americans only some 14% of the population. Probably, I haven't studied this, only 8 or 9% of the voting public. But it does wield power in certain districts. How does the political, what is the political landscape? How is SCA going to affect politics in this election this year? Let's try, Henry, you hardly ever start first. Be mindful of time, please.
Yeah, okay. I feel that this, the debate around this has gotten hyper emotional in some ways, which is unfortunate. As a Chinese parent, my wife and I, we raised 3 kids. They all went through the UC system. Like many of you, you worry about them doing well in school, or do well enough, I should say, to get into the UCs or any other school. And I fully understand the concern that families, and some of you feel that this may be a quota against Chinese, that somehow or another the roadblock is going to stop. Again, if the language in this SCA had the word quota or parity, I would be against it. I think what we need to understand is we want educational opportunities for all, and we don't want to see, I would hate to see our community being used politically for some other kind of agenda. I think it's really important for us to look at UC and the CSUs, who's being admitted, who's eligible, and do we have enough resources to serve all those who deserve to be admitted to our great universities. Because the master plan was a very good plan that was developed in 1960. Unfortunately, we have lost the public will, and politicians have not stepped up to the plate to honor the master plan for higher education in California. And I think that's regrettable, because again, we end up fighting for what we perceive to be diminishing opportunities when we should go the other way and expand opportunities for all. We should be spending more on education than on prisons.
Thank you, Mr. Thurman. Would the Senator like to address this issue? You're that center in the politics. By the way, Senator Huff's district abuts Senator Hernandez, just east of us.
Yes, it does. It's hard to know what the politics of the process is. When I was in local government for 9 years, we were nonpartisan. We just got stuff done. And then you get up in Sacramento and everything takes on a partisan tone. And sometimes it should, certainly our education should not be a political football that we throw back and forth at election time. But it appears that's what this has done, and I would guess from looking at previous elections that parties look for issues that they can help drive out voters that they think will help them in the polls. So for a little history, whoever controls the White House in a second term, their party tends to lose offices nationwide, which includes California. We're going to have a governor that's running for his 4th term. While we all like Governor Brown, he doesn't inspire passion because it's the same thing as what we got for the last 4 years. So there's not a lot to drive out Democrat voters, and yet you have very important elections up. So somebody looks back in their magic hat of tricks and sees an issue that was passed back during probably a Republican governor's time, and they look at the data on this, and when you look at Prop 209, African Americans opposed Prop 209 in the 70 percentiles. Latinos oppose it in the 70 percentiles. Asian Americans supported or opposed it in the lower 60 percentiles, about 61% or so as I recall. It was a little fuzzy off my mind. So they look back at this and say, these are our constituencies. Here's an issue where we can drive them to the polls. I'm purely speculating, I want to be very clear on it, but that's how things work in Sacramento. They didn't anticipate that since 1996 and 2014 that our Asian population is more politically astute, that many of you have come to this country looking for educational opportunity, and that by reversing the racial protection found in Prop 209, it actually flies in the face of the very motivation, the whole thing you were trying to do to help your kids excel in this very competitive state, national, and global economy.
Thank you, Senator Huff.
American history at UC Berkeley for 40 years. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, how to deal with SC5, I'd like all of us to reflect upon history, where we have come from, and from whom we have derived a lot of benefits and help. You know, we were all victims of racial discrimination up until the 1960s. And as I said earlier, that a lot of the universities closed their doors to minorities and women up until then. And who kicked the door open so that we can enter? And once we enter, if we succeed, let us not forget other people who have helped us to given us the opportunity and help us succeed. There's a Chinese saying, 饮水思源, 饮水思源. You got to remember where we have come from, and also I think we have an obligation, just as pure and simple American, that we want to be helpful to other people who are less advantageous than we are. And as a result of our benefit from what had happened in the civil rights movement, I think we ought to be mindful that there are still a lot of unfortunate and less advantaged people around us, and that we need to also consider their opportunities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang.
So, just to the professor's last point, as I've said about 4 or 5 times, the UCs lead the country in admission of disadvantaged students. The notion that it's this enclave of affluent, white elitists is just not true. There is a university, a public university in this country that matches, there may be a couple lower tier ones, of anywhere close to the caliber of the UCs that matches its outreach to disadvantaged students, number one. Number two, to Henry's point, if they put the word quota in there, they'd have to be dumber than they seem. You know, you don't put quota in there. To figure out what the underlying intent of this bill is. And finally, as to the politics of it, I don't know what animated Senator Hernandez to do with this year, but this bill has been enacted before. It was passed in the prior session, and the only reason it didn't become law is because Governor Brown saw it as being crazy. So instead of having to get vetoed again by Governor Brown, they made it into a constitutional amendment. And the politics are kind of mind-blowing, but in any event, it's been around before. I don't think Senator Hernandez had any notion, since there was no resistance the first time around when it was passed by both houses of the legislature, he kind of assumed that there wouldn't be any resistance this time. And having had lunch last week with a Chinese-American legislator, he said there was no whisper of opposition until a couple of weeks ago. Well, I think the tide has turned, and people realize that this is not going to pass like a knife through butter, and it's a very bad idea.
On that a little bit, there are some questions here about how did this get under the radar screen and no one noticed. I think perhaps it's not so much for the panelists to answer, but perhaps I will offer my observation of Sacramento over 20-some years. Is that when no one's watching, anything will pass. So, the fault is actually upon our own community that we have not been watching for bills that affect our well-being. Whether you're for or against it, if you feel strongly for or against something, you need to keep watch. And no one, of course, can keep an eye on all the zillions of bills that go through Sacramento and where they are in the Assembly, where they are in the Senate, what committee they are going through, who are the committee chairs. And that is the job of usually professional lobbyists or your elected representative. Now, Mr. Lay already noticed that there are two previous bills that have passed, both the Senate and the Assembly, without a whisper that no one knew about. So this time it's just passed through because no one thought twice about it. It's passed twice, so what is the big deal with the third time, right? But this time apparently has generated some interest, and through the power of the internet, probably more than anything else, people are up in arms in no time in very large numbers. And this would not have happened 20 years ago, but it's taken a few weeks to get so many people to learn about this issue. On the other hand, the power of the internet has a negative side. That is, rumors fly everywhere. Don't believe what people tell you on the internet. Don't believe all this. You sign 1,000 times and Paul Fang will vote no. No politician will ever do that, ever. And he is not going to come here and listen to you right here to attack him and to badger him. So don't believe in those things. Use some common sense, please. And the only real information you're going to get out of is Ed Hernandez's office. And he is the guy who's going to be announcing this, not Mei Huff, as somebody has said on the internet as well. So just use your common sense. And APAPA has hired a lobbyist in Sacramento to be watching those kind of bills, and specifically for the progress of this bill. We're happy to share that information with any group who wants to get informed when they go to committees, and when they go to committees, and what the vote is out of the committee, who voted for and who voted against, when is it likely to come to the Assembly floor. Sometimes these things can happen in a hurry. Political maneuvering, and Senator Huff knows, and I think all of our panelists know, they can push things through under the table. They can push things through very quickly. Before you notice, it's gone, it's passed. Okay, well, you do get a vote in November if this does pass through. So anyway, that's sort of my guess. It's not so much the Chinese American senators want to go against the will of the community, but they have not heard from nobody. This passed twice and no one has said anything. But now they've noticed, and they have issued a statement that they will not support this bill as is if it comes back to the Senate. But just remember, there are nuances in language. As is means as is. Amended in some way, material or not, might mean different changes in position. So everybody read carefully. Politics is a art. It's very difficult to maneuver, and don't be fooled by people. Either party, anybody, any senator, any assembly person, always think about in this current form, under certain criteria, they're not real promises. And promises are broken all the time, as you know as well. Anyway, so that's sort of my explanation. We'd like to recognize a couple other candidates who have arrived. Mr. David Ehrlich is a candidate for mayor of Oakland, who is with us. Where is he? Oh, over here. Oh, hello. Hi, sorry. Oh, it's this assembly for 17th District Assembly here. 18th. I'm sorry, 18th. Mr. Wade is the mayor candidate for Oakland. Thank you. Thank you for coming and taking time to listen to our community. Now I'm going to venture into something else that has come across my eyes a few times here as well, and this is another touchy issue, race relations. What does this bill mean to race relations in California? Is this going to pit Asian American against Hispanic or Black? And if that does happen, I can tell you right now, we lose. How do we do this? How do we reach out and talk to other groups and negotiate or make each other understand each other's position? It's okay to agree to disagree. It is not okay to attack people from the back. So let's have, I think, Henry, you probably the expert on race relations here. Would you mind to comment?
Well, I don't know if I'm an expert. I am very concerned about the tone and tenor of this debate. Again, I want to state very clearly, I understand why people would oppose SCA 5 if they believe that this is a quota bill for Latinos or blacks. Or quota bill against Asians. Because that's why, why are Chinese community members so irate about this bill? Because they feel, as Mr. Lair has said, he himself said it, that if SCA passes, you're going to see a decline in Asians. Admissions to UC. Well, if I'm a parent with a kid going possibly to UC, I would be upset that it's a quota against my kid. And that's why many of you signed petitions. And you have come here. Now, I think that race relationships is in a very precarious way because of how the opponents have characterized this bill. There are problems with this bill in its current form. And I think all of us should express our concerns to the author so that it can be changed and that the true intent of this bill can come forward again. And I fear that when people talk about parity or quotas, it will affect race relationships among blacks, Latinos, and Chinese and other Asians. And we should not allow that. It's really important that we understand what is it that we want out of the UCs, the kind of standard that they should maintain, and CSU for that matter. What resources do they need to maintain a viable institution? That's what, you know, at the end of the day, let's say that SCA 5 doesn't go anyplace. Okay, it's killed. The opponents have succeeded. But what have we really gained? Have we gained more opportunities?
Okay, please be quiet.
How are we gaining more opportunities when 10,000 admissions are going to out-of-state applicants and international students?
Thank you. Okay.
How are we gaining more? How are we gaining more opportunities? This is why. Wait, hold it. No. Foreign students and California and out-of-state students don't have high priority in my estimation. I'm a California taxpayer. You're a California taxpayer. We're the ones who support the CSUs and the UCs and community colleges. Our students come first. And we need to make sure that we have the resources there available for California students, because these are California institutions.
Thank you, Henry. I didn't want to bring this out earlier, but I think it was getting a bit out of control, so I can prepare it. Thank you. So, Senator Huff, would you like to address this?
I think we have to be very careful of this thing, but let's be clear. Nobody in this room introduced the bill. The bill is what introduced race as an issue, because it strives to strike race as a consideration on admission policies. So we didn't bring the argument. And when you do start to make decisions that include race as a criteria, you will be making what can only be described as discriminating choices. That may not be the intent, that will be the consequence. And I want to be real clear about this because it's like a broken record in here. This is not about quotas. This is not about more funding. This is not about foreign students. SCA 5 is, how do we choose the students that are going to go to our UC system, regardless of whether it's 2%, 9%, or 12.5%? How are we going to make that choice? That's what's before us. That's what the legislature will be voting on, and that's what we have to decide about how we lobby it.
You know, I want to second what Albert said earlier about, be careful about what you read and what you hear. Because this whole thing, I think, got started back in February 1, and I'll read you the headline of the Chinese language newspaper. There are too many Asians in UC. The Democrats wanted to set a quota for Asians. And then the subheading, the Senate had passed the SVCA5, and the plan is to repeal 1996-209 proposition, and then to protect quotas for Hispanic and African Americans. That's how this whole thing got started. So you got to, when you read something like this, you have to question, go to the source and find out. There's no byline in this article, no sources attributed here, and I think, and yet it's being reported as news. And this is how I think this whole movement got started. And I think we really have to think carefully. And what Henry said about race relations, race is a very, very touchy, politically, emotionally charged thing in our society. And it could be easily triggered into some, hysterical movement. And I hope that we are all very, I think we're calm people, and we're not going to be fooled, nor we're going to be misled by misinformation or disinformation.
Thank you for the comment.
Yeah, so just to follow up on the professor, in fact, the passions that are aroused are because this is such a sensitive issue. And I wish Senator Hernandez would have thought of that before he introduced this amendment. And the problem is that once you start into this discussion, the underlying worldview that animates SCA5 is that you allocate resources based on race and ethnicity, and ultimately preferences is what it devolves into. And that's a dangerous game to play. But to respond to one other point, which I think has to be made, there is an issue and there is a problem. The problem is the admission of African American students to the 3 flagship universities, which are lower than one would hope and one would expect. When you only have 201 blacks admitted to UCLA out of 4,100 freshmen, and at UC Berkeley 117 out of 3,000 freshmen, that's a problem. And the question is, do you need a constitutional amendment to begin to seriously deal with that problem and the underrepresentation? It needs some creative planning, which the UCs are trying to do, but it's a tough issue. Those are the 3, UCLA, Berkeley, and San Diego are the 3 schools where there is a serious underrepresentation of blacks from what one would expect from their percentage in the high school graduating class and those who qualified with the A through G requirements. So those are the 3 problem areas. Other than that, in almost all the UCs, virtually every minority group is represented appropriately, and if not doing very well, it's the whites who are underrepresented. That's not a particular issue. But there are problems, but the answer is not a constitutional amendment to get rid of non-discrimination.
Thank you all for our panelists. We're coming to a close of the questioning. Would each one spend about 3 minutes draw a conclusion upon what you heard today, what you intend to say to the audience? Let's start with from the other end, from Mr. Durd, and move back this way.
Well, I want to thank you all for listening to me. You may not have agreed with me.
3 minutes.
I appreciate your listening to me. I'd just like to say that Senator Hernandez did not consult with me when he developed his bill. I see that there is a lot of room for this SCA to be improved, amended, and changed. I think the underlying intent is a good one, is that we need to have outreach and encourage all of our students to do the best that they can and to reward them with admission to UC and CSU if they meet the standards. And I think that's what we need to remember in this whole debate. And I respectfully disagree with my panel members, at least two of them. This should not be a zero-sum game. And politically, it does come down to that from a political perspective. Because if the opponents feel that this is going to be a quota against Asian applicants and it's going to be given to something else, of course you have every right to be concerned about this. And I think this is why we need to get clarification from Senator Hernandez as to what is the intent and what needs to be done with the language of the bill, and not rely on someone else's interpretation. So I would encourage everybody to be in touch with Senator Hernandez and to participate in the legislative hearings so that there is a debate going back and forth as to what it is, and not to assume certain things about what this amendment may or may not do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. Mr. Leo?
Yes, I'll be brief. I just want to reiterate what I've said before. I think it is a flawed bill. I think that the worldview that underpins the bill is flawed. I think that for the most part, the UCs and CSUs have done an outstanding job in keeping and maintaining and increasing the diversity on their campuses without resorting to what existed prior to Prop 209. I pointed out the three areas where there are problems: UCLA, Berkeley, and San Diego, with regard to African American students, that does need attention and work. But the solution that this bill offers is a solution that is dangerous, that is just poorly thought out, and I suspect that were it to come on the ballot, it will be rejected out of hand by the people of California.
I agree with Mr. Laird, believe it or not. The SCA5 is flawed. I think it needs to be changed. And that's why I had gone up to Sacramento to talk to various legislators to try to persuade them to make some changes there. But I think, there's a bigger battle for all of us. And I think we should bear that in mind. That University of California has become increasingly privatized. I don't know if you can notice this or not. It cannot hardly be called a public university anymore. Because a campus like Berkeley, my own campus, and I love my campus because I spent all my life teaching there. We only get about 10% of our annual expenditure from the state of California. The rest of the 90% come from other sources. And also, our tuition is going up every year. And a lot of people have become not very affordable anymore. So I think that we need to...
Please, it's okay. Please let him finish.
I think that we need to fight for the revitalization and the recommitment of the master plan, so that more and more people will have opportunities to get into UC, because the pie is going to get smaller and smaller if we don't increase that piece of pie. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Wang.
Well, it's been a very robust forum today, and appreciate everybody's patience, appreciate the panelists here. And I think that we have seen a clear distinction between those that feel this is flawed, and we have some agreement on both sides, versus those that think it can't go on in any form. Public education is a real challenge in our state. We spend over half of our state budget on it. While it's true that some of the top parts of our UC system, like Berkeley, may be only getting 10% of public funding, we're getting 40 to 50% for the university system statewide, and it's more than that for the CSU. So we have a tremendous investment. Having said that, it's still one of the best values among public educational institutions in the nation. So we have a real fundamental question. How do we keep it a top value? And I think we should relook at the master plan of education and give a commitment to our students. But we also have our newest university in Central Valley that goes wanting. It has space because people don't want to go there. It doesn't have the reputation of Berkeley or Irvine or UCLA. And so part of it is perception that newer is not necessarily better. But I can't solve the funding problem today. I can't speak to a lot of the issues we do today. I will say this about foreign students. I've traveled around the world, and one of our best exports for the United States, and that includes California, one of our best exports is our education. Because people come here, they see our values, and they transplant those back to their other countries. And to the degree that we have a significant number of foreign students in the University of California system, it's still much lower than the national average of foreign students in other public institutions. So we need to keep that in perspective. And I wouldn't take that away from them. I think we need to grow the pie bigger so that we have more opportunities for everybody. But the fundamental issue before us today is SCA5 a good policy for the state of California? The voters weighed in, much like you are today, back in 1996 and said race should not be a consideration on how we admit people into our public schools. And I will submit today, it still should not be. I would take you back to what the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice said, that if you're going to stop racial discrimination, you've got to stop discriminating by race. I don't think there is a way to fix this. If there's a way to amend the admission policy, the UC regents have the ability to do that. They are autonomous from the state. We don't tell them what to do. We control a piece of the budget that we give them. They do everything else on their own. Now the Constitution is something they have to abide by. So if we change this Constitution, that gives them a loophole to adjust the student population however they want. And they're not elected, they're not accountable. You need to make sure that you have people that represent you that are accountable. Your money goes where it's accountable. In any way you look at it, from my perspective, this is flawed policy. We don't want to turn the clock back, and I hope that we can kill SCA5 in the Assembly. Thank you all. Thank you our panelists, and thank you to the audience. And thank you for those who are outside during the weather.
And hopefully this is a trigger in my involvement with community activism for Chinese Americans to join an effort. There's always a trigger. Trigger often is education, such as this. Sometimes there's other discriminatory factors, such as immigration issues, families who can come or cannot come to this country. But not many people stay engaged. So think about this. Think about this as an experience. Think about how this suddenly happened to our community, and why was it that this could happen to our community without us knowing? It's because we're weak. And why are we weak? Because we don't vote, we don't voice our opinion, we don't register, we go back and we do our own 至少门前雪 and sweep in front of the snow in front of our own house. So please remember this as a lesson. This is going to happen more and more in the future. If you intend to stay in this country, your children will be Americans. Be sure you pay more attention to American issues than you do Chinese issues, which of course you can be involved. You know, we're all Chinese and we believe in our culture, and we belong to that diaspora around the world. But nevertheless, this is where our roots are, and this is where our children's roots will be. And pay more attention, and that's all we want to do. APAPA wants to empower Asian Americans to engage more. Whatever party, whatever position, whatever you do, just be engaged. Show your voice. Talk to people around you, other races, your friends, your families, your colleagues, schoolmates, other parents.